The sky was the color of iron, flat and cold above the high plains. Snow had fallen in the night, but now it was only wind that moved, skimming across the crusted drifts and whispering through the splintered slats of the cattle pens. A hawk hung above the far ridge, waiting. He came walking out of the gray like something the wind had forgotten. One boot dragged a little, maybe from an old break. His hat was pulled low, coat cinched tight. In his gloved hand he carried a rope halter and not much else. The barn was burned out. Only the stone foundation and the black skeleton of its frame remained sagging like a man too tired to stand. The house beside it was worse. A single wall still stood leaning stubbornly against the sky, but the rest had buckled under fire or time, maybe both. Snow sifted through what had once been a roof. He stopped at the edge of it all, the wind pressing against his back, and stared, not like a man surprised, just like one taking inventory. Then came the sound. Not a voice, not yet. Just the soft hiccup of a child's cry, quick, muffled. He turned his head, listened. There in the wreckage, he stepped into the charred bones of the house, boots cracking through the crusted snow. His breath was a ghost before him. He moved with the caution of someone who had seen traps where none should be, but his eyes were kind. She was crouched behind what used to be a hearth. Her dress was torn, face soot-smudged, arms wrapped tight around two small boys pressed against her ribs. Another child, a girl maybe 7 or 8, clung to her skirts. The fourth, the one who had cried, was an infant swaddled in a coat too large. None of them spoke. He knelt slowly, one knee in the snow halter falling limp in his hand. The woman raised her chin. Her eyes were ringed dark with smoke and hunger. She didn't flinch, didn't beg, just looked at him like a challenge, like someone who'd already decided no man would be worse than what they'd already faced. "You alone?" he asked quietly. Her voice was hoarse. "Ain't no one left?" He nodded once. The wind yanked at his collar. "What happened?" "Fire came from the south. Folks scattered. Some didn't make it. We stayed too long." He looked past her. Nothing but blackened fence posts, wide sky, and the silence of what used to be. "You from here?" She shook her head. "Was passing through. Stayed when my husband got work. That was spring." Her jaw twitched, but she didn't cry. "He's gone." He looked at the children. Bone-thin, filthy. One of the boys had cracked lips and fever in his eyes. The girl's knuckles were scraped raw. "You got kin anywhere?" "No." He stood slowly. The wind shoved against him harder now, pushing snow into the open space where a roof should been. The infant whimpered again, and the woman bent to hush it. Her movements were stiff, like her limbs had forgotten how to move without pain. He took off his coat and stepped forward. She tensed. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, voice low. "But the cold's already try and take it." She hesitated, then reached for it with one hand, never letting go of the child with the other. He turned back toward the open plain. "I got a wagon a half-mile down the ridge. Some food. It ain't much, but it's warm." She didn't speak, just stared at him. "You can stay here and freeze, or you can come." The girl looked up at her mother, eyes wide. One of the boys coughed, a wet, rattling sound that echoed too loudly in the stillness. The woman pressed her mouth to the baby's head and stood. "All right." He stepped aside, letting her pass first. The children stumbled after her, too tired to be afraid. As they walked away, the last wall of the house groaned in the wind and gave up, falling inward with a sound like a long-held breath letting go. He didn't look back. The wagon was little more than a buckboard with a patched canvas canopy and 2 weary mules. It stood parked beside a lone cottonwood, half dead and creaking in the wind. The tree was the only thing tall enough to break the endless line of the horizon. He lifted the girl up first, She was light as a sack of flour legs, swinging awkwardly as she settled on the worn plank. The boys he carried one under each arm. Neither resisted. The smallest of them murmured something in a fevered slur, his head rolling against the man's shoulder. Last was the woman. She clutched the baby tight, her steps unsteady in the snow. He offered his hand. She hesitated, then placed her palm in his, her skin cracked and cold as river stone. He helped her up, then climbed in beside them. A wool blanket was folded beneath the bench. He passed it to her. She wrapped the children as best she could and tucked the infant close to her chest. The wind had grown sharper and the clouds above them hung low, threatening more snow before nightfall. He clicked to the mules and took up the reins. For a long time they rode in silence. The wagon wheels creaked. The harness chains clinked with each step. The wind never let up, but the land slowly changed. Rolling hills gave way to a shallow valley lined with sage and bare cottonwood. After nearly an hour, the shape of a cabin came into view, tucked against a rise. Smoke lifted from the chimney in a thin, steady line. The windows glowed faint yellow with lantern light. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing. "You live out here alone?" He nodded. "Since spring. Been working cattle out near White Butte. Ain't much for company." The girl beside her shivered and pressed into her side. The man noticed and tapped the reins. "Almost there." They pulled to a stop near the lean-to shed beside the cabin. He climbed down and reached up to help them one by one. The woman refused his hand. This time she'd found some part of her strength again and managed the step herself, though her knees buckled a little when she landed. The door creaked open into warmth and wood smoke. The room inside was small but clean. Rough pine walls, a cast-iron stove, a battered table, and one bed made tight with wool blanket. A rocking chair stood in the corner and a rifle hung above the door. He led them in and stoked the stove higher. The warmth swept in slow, curling fingers across the floor. "There's water on the stove. You can wash up some," he said. "Food'll take a while." She didn't reply, just unwrapped the blanket, took the baby out of her coat, and sat on the floor near the stove. The children collapsed beside her, all four of them in a heap like animals, finally safe enough to sleep. He watched them for a moment, then turned and set to work. Venison stew from a pot he'd left cooling, cornbread from a cloth-lined tin, dried apples stewed back to life with sugar and water. It wasn't much, but it filled the space with the smell of comfort. The boy with the fever stirred awake when the food hit the table. The others followed, silent but alert, now the kind of hungry that ran deep. She tried to make them wait, but he set plates in front of each and sat across from them. "Eat," he said. "God knows you need it more than I do." They ate like they hadn't in weeks. She kept her eyes on the bowl, one hand on the baby who suckled sleepily beneath her shawl. The children devoured every bite. When it was done, they slumped back, dazed and full. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. "Clay." He didn't look up from where he was cleaning the bowls. "Clay Henderson." She hesitated, then said, "My name's Mara." He nodded once. The name seemed to settle in the air as if it belonged there already. The wind beat against the cabin walls, but inside the world was quiet. Clay set another log on the fire. Mara leaned back against the wall, the baby curled on her chest. Her eyes flickered closed. She hadn't meant to sleep, but her body gave in. Clay sat back in the rocking chair, arms crossed, gaze drifting over the 5 shapes resting on his floor. He hadn't planned on company. He hadn't planned on anything anymore. But they were here now, and he could not walk away. The saddle's ready, subscribe and climb on. Mara woke to the crackle of fire and the sharp scent of pine smoke. Her neck ached from sleeping upright, her arm numb beneath the baby's weight. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, then the shape of the room, the soft wheeze of the stove, and the quiet breathing of her children brought it all back. The cabin. The stranger. Clay. He wasn't in the chair anymore. The rocker sat still, shadows pooled in its curve. She looked around, heart climbing up her throat. The boys were curled beside each other, the fevered one still flushed, but breathing easier. Her daughter Anna was wrapped around her middle like a vine face, buried in her mother's side. The baby Elise was warm and quiet. The door creaked. She turned just as Clay stepped back inside, a rush of cold trailing behind him. He carried a small sack slung over his shoulder and a narrow bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Snow dusted his shoulders. "Morning," he said. She blinked. "Is it?" He nodded and walked past her, setting the sack down on the table. "Barely." The oilcloth bundle, when he unwrapped it, revealed 2 tin cups, a folding knife, and a worn book. He set them aside with quiet care. "I went down to the creek. There's fresh water if you want to wash," he said without turning. She shifted Elise gently, then stood. Her back screamed. Her muscles didn't want to move. Still, she crossed to the stove, poured a little of the warmed water into a bowl, and dipped in a rag. She knelt to clean the children's faces one by one. They stirred but didn't wake. The water turned gray. He watched her, quiet. When she glanced up, she caught the edge of something in his eyes, not pity. Something more fragile. Something like memory. "You got children?" she asked, rinsing the rag. He looked away. "No." She waited, but he didn't explain. "Wife, wife?" "No." She pressed her lips together. There was nothing soft in his voice, but there was nothing mean either. Just fact scraped down to the bone. "I had someone once," he said after a moment. "She died." Mara didn't ask how. She just nodded. That kind of pain didn't need explanation. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't bitter. Just hollow like space waiting to be filled. He set about cooking cornmeal mush with lard and a little honey. Mara found herself watching the way his hands moved, sure, simple, without waste. The firelight cut across his jaw. He looked older now than he had the night before. Not by years, but by wear. She thought of the fire, the stampede of horses, her husband's body falling hard into the dust. The days after hiding. The hunger. The quiet madness that crept in when no one answered your voice. She hadn't cried. Not once. Not even when she buried him. The children had been too hungry, too frightened, too near death. There hadn't been time for softness. But now, in the scent of hot food and wood smoke, with her children sleeping warm for the first time in weeks, she felt something loosen in her throat. He served the bowls without speaking, as if he understood it all. She ate slowly this time, letting the warmth sink in. The baby suckled again, greedy now. Clay leaned against the table, sipping from a tin cup of coffee gone cold. "You got plans?" he asked. Mara looked up. "What kind?" He shrugged. "Winter's not done. Won't be safe to travel till near spring." "I wasn't planning to travel," she said quietly. "Didn't know if we'd make it past yesterday." He nodded once. The wind rattled the shutters. "You can stay here," he said. "There's work if you want it. Ain't much, but enough to keep busy." She narrowed her eyes. "And what do you want in return?" His face didn't change. "Nothing. Just don't want to watch another soul starve." She studied him. The scar that traced his temple. The way he didn't fidget or flinch. A man who'd seen more than he said. "I'll work," she said. "You don't need to coddle us." "I know." They finished breakfast. The children stirred their bodies, pulling back toward life. Mara stood and began to clean again. Clay opened the cabin door and stepped into the light. The sky had cleared. Snow still covered the ground, but the sun was strong and white. Steam curled from the mules as they shifted in the pen. He didn't say it aloud, but something had settled in him too. They were here now. And maybe, just maybe, they were meant to be. By the next week, the rhythm of life had changed. Mara rose early, same as Clay. Before the frost had melted from the windows, she'd have water boiling, the baby latched quietly under her shawl, and the boys bundled outside to relieve themselves behind the shed. Anna helped without being asked, folding blankets, dusting the shelves, rocking Elise when Mara needed both hands. Clay didn't speak much during those hours. He'd nod when he passed through the cabin, tugging on his gloves, heading out to tend the mules or split wood. She watched him from the window, sometimes the deliberate way he moved, like each step had purpose. He worked hard and without complaint. That she respected. In return, she did what she could. She mended what was torn, kept the fire going, taught the children how to do more than survive. One day, she boiled lye soap in a heavy pot and showed Anna how to scrub it through their clothes with a river stone Clay had brought up from the creek. "This ain't the same as it was," Mara murmured, hanging a shirt on the line. Anna glanced up. "What do you mean?" "I mean we're not hiding anymore." The girl didn't answer, but her eyes followed Clay as he walked by with a saddle over his shoulder, and Mara saw at that new steadiness in her daughter's gaze, a calm that hadn't been there before. That night, after the children were asleep, Clay lingered by the fire. Mara sat across from him with Elise in her lap. The baby's breath came slow, and even a soft puff of warmth against Mara's wrist. He watched the flames. "Your husband. What was his name?" She hesitated, then said Jacob. "You loved him." "I did," she said simply. "But love didn't stop the world from falling apart." He nodded, not looking at her. "No, it doesn't." The fire popped. A knot in the wood cracked open. "He was a good man," she added, quieter now. "He worked hard, tried to keep us safe. But the world out here, it takes everything. Doesn't leave much room for mistakes." Clay leaned back, arms resting on the arms of the chair. "I made plenty of those," he said. "Too many to count." She didn't ask, and he didn't offer more. But she thought of the way he'd brought them in. No questions, no hesitation. The extra blankets, the salt meat he'd portioned without a word. The old wooden cradle he'd pulled from the loft and scrubbed clean, setting it near the fire like it had always been there. He wasn't a man looking for absolution, but maybe he'd found something close. The next morning he took the two oldest boys out with him. Said he needed help checking traps. Mara watched them go with her arms crossed, her heart tight. But when they returned near sundown, cold, tired, but beaming with pride over a rabbit and two squirrels, she felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "They followed instruction well," Clay said, brushing snow from his sleeves. "Tough little men you've got." Mara smiled faintly. "They had to be." Anna read to her brothers that night, her voice steady as she traced the worn words of the Bible Clay had left on the shelf. Mara watched her from the table, fingers still sore from scrubbing. Clay stepped beside her with two tin cups. "You ever think about starting over?" he asked, not looking at her. "I don't think I ever stopped." He passed her the cup. Coffee, strong and dark. She took it, their fingers brushing. There was no softness in this place, not in the wind, not in the work, not in the land itself. But there was something steadier now, something taking root. She looked at him, then really looked. Saw the quiet grief behind his steadiness. The strength built from being alone too long. The part of him that still believed in doing right even if no one was watching. "You didn't have to take us in," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I did." He turned back to the window, watching snow fall quiet across the darkened yard. The mules stood huddled in the lean-to. Smoke curled soft into the night sky. Inside the cabin breathed with warmth and sleeping children. Outside the wind carried on. The thaw came slow that year. Mornings stayed bitter, the frost clinging past sunup, but the days stretched longer, and the snow that once buried the hills now melted in streaks along the south-facing slope. Streams broke free with a rush, carving paths through mud and gravel. The cabin sagged less under winter's weight. Mara stood barefoot on the packed dirt floor, holding Elise against her shoulder. The baby had started to lift her head, now neck-straining fists curled. She liked the sound of Anna's voice, laughed when her brothers made faces, and slept better when Clay was near, even in silence. Mara noticed that, the way Elise settled quicker when his footsteps passed near, the way the boys looked for his nod before dragging wood inside or offering to help fix the door latch. He didn't bark commands or raise his voice, but his presence steadied them like a post driven deep into the ground. The morning was warmer than usual when Clay asked her to ride out with him. "I'll take the boys another day," he said. "Just need an extra set of hands." She looked at him, one brow lifted. "You saying I can pull my weight now?" "I'm saying I trust you not to fall off a horse." It was half a joke. She took it as a compliment. The children watched from the door as they rode out together, her on the mule named Whiskey, who was slower but sure-footed. She hadn't ridden in months. Not since the fire. Not since Jacob. But the rhythm came back. The prairie rolled out before them, soft in its emptiness. Dried grass rustled in clumps, and the wind carried the first hints of spring damp earth, thawed dung, and the faint metallic tang of creek water breaking free. They didn't talk much at first, just rode. Eventually they reached a rise, and Clay pulled up beside a stunted pine, branches reaching crooked into the blue. "Need to fix some fence out past here," he said. "Cattle start to wander once the grass comes in." They dismounted and walked the line, boots sinking in softening mud. He handed her a pair of gloves and pointed out the gaps, old wire sagging posts cracked low to the ground. She watched how he worked. Precise, efficient, quiet. And when her hand slipped, trying to twist the wire taut, he reached without a word and caught it, his palm warm through the glove. "Thanks," she said, breath quick. He didn't let go right away. Neither did she. Later they sat side by side on a fallen log, drinking from the same canteen, watching the sky shift overhead. "I wasn't sure what kind of man you were," she said, not quite looking at him. He nodded once, slowly. "Still not, maybe," she added, lips tugging toward a smile. "That's fair," he said. "But I ain't hiding anything." She believed him. "I was angry for a long time," she said. "At Jacob. At the men who came riding through. At the folks who saw us running and shut their doors." Clay's jaw tightened. He stared out at the horizon. "You have a right to be. I don't want to live inside that anger anymore." He turned to her. "You ain't? You're here." Silence settled between them, softer than before. Then gently he asked, "What would you want if it were up to you now?" She didn't answer right away. Wind stirred her hair. The sun cast long shadows behind them. "I'd want a home," she said finally. "Not just a roof. A place where my kids can feel safe, where I can breathe without thinking it might all burn again." He looked at her then, long and steady. "I've got land. Got tools. Got more room in that cabin than I ever needed." She met his eyes, heart thudding. "You offering?" "I'm saying you can have what's here," he said. "If you want it. Not a demand. Not a rescue. An invitation." Mara stood slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Let's finish the fence." Clay smiled just a flicker and rose beside her. They worked till the sun dipped west, and when they rode back, the wind had softened and the smell of sage rose from the damp earth. The children ran out to meet them, calling her name, grabbing her hands, shouting about what they'd done that day. And as she stepped down from the mule, the baby's cry rising from the cabin, and Clay's hand steadying her elbow, she felt it for the first time. Not just safety. Belonging. Trouble came with the thaw. It rode in on a gray horse with a blaze on its nose, cutting across the valley like it had every right to. Clay saw him first, a speck cresting the rise above the cabin, slow but sure, the kind of approach that meant the rider wasn't afraid of what he might find. Mara was inside feeding the baby. Clay set down the axe, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked to the edge of the yard. The wind had a bite to it still, though the snow was gone from the lower ground. Mud clung to everything now, boots, wagon wheels, the children's knees. The rider didn't raise a hand, didn't speak until he was nearly level. "You Clay Henderson?" "I am." The man pulled up. He was broad-shouldered with a heavy tan coat and a badge clipped to his breast pocket. "Marshal George Tiller." "Got a few questions." Clay didn't move. "That's so." The marshal glanced toward the cabin, then back. "You took in a woman and 4 children." "About 5 weeks back." "I did. Name's Mara Trask." "She told me Mara. Never asked for a last." Tiller looked at him for a long moment. "Well, her husband's kin's been looking for her. Think she might taken something that didn't belong to her when she left." Clay's jaw tightened. "She didn't leave. Her home burned. Her husband's dead. Still don't mean she had a right to what she took." "What exactly are you claiming she took?" The marshal pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "Warrant, maybe, or just something to make him look official." Clay didn't reach for it. "Land money. From a sale Jacob made before he died. Kin says they never saw it. Think she ran off with it." Clay shook his head. "She didn't run. She was trying to survive. That ain't how the law sees it." "I don't give a damn how the law sees it." Tiller's gaze narrowed. "You obstructin' Henderson." Clay stepped forward slow. "I'm saying you better think real hard before you go banging on that door like a man with no soul. There's 4 children in there. One still nursing." A silence passed between them. Thick, cold. Finally, Tiller eased back in the saddle. "Tell her I'll be back in 2 days. If she don't come willingly, I'll bring men." He turned the horse and rode off the way he came. Clay watched him go, heart hammering. When he turned, Mara was already at the door, arms folded, baby held close. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set. "I heard." Clay nodded. "You know anything about this money?" She closed her eyes a moment. "Jacob sold the last piece of land we had in Missouri. Said he'd hold onto the money till we got settled. But after the fire, I never saw a dime." "Then it's a lie." She looked up at him, tears glinting but not falling. "Doesn't matter. If a man like that wants to make me guilty, he will." He crossed to her and put his hand on her shoulder. "We'll fight it. I'm not letting them take you." The next day, Clay rode out. He stopped by the homesteads he'd helped build with his own 2 hands, the families who owed him favors or just respected the way he kept to himself and did good work. Quiet men. Women who saw what Mara had done with the children in just a few weeks. Folks who still remembered what happened to the Trask Ranch, how no one came to help. By nightfall, they'd built something stronger than a defense. They'd built a wall of truth. When Tiller returned, he wasn't met by just Clay. He was met by 12 neighbors, 3 rifles, and 1 woman holding a baby with a spine of iron. "This woman belongs here," Clay said. "She's done more honest work in 5 weeks than most men do in a year." Tiller scowled, but even he knew when the odds had changed. He turned without a word and rode away. They stood in silence as his shape faded over the ridge. Then Mara turned to Clay. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She looked at him, voice shaking now. "Why did you?" He didn't smile, just touched her face gentle. "Because I ain't the kind of man who walks away anymore." The wind lifted around them, but this time it felt clean, like something broken finally healing. And in the doorway, Anna held her brothers close, watching something stronger than fear take root. Spring settled in like a long breath finally let out. The snowmelt fed the creek, and the grass came up shy but green along the edges of the pasture. Clay plowed the small patch near the barn while the boys hauled buckets to soak the turned soil. Anna followed behind with a basket of seed potatoes and dried beans, her face already burned red across the nose. Mara moved like she belonged now. She no longer waited for permission or flinched at every unexpected sound. She built routines the children could count on. She mended shirts in the sunlight, took the wash down to the rocks near the water, taught Elise to crawl across the wooden floor. And when Clay came back from long days riding fence or checking stock, she had food waiting, not out of obligation, but out of something quieter, something steadier, trust. One evening she stood at the table brushing crumbs into her palm when Clay came in with mud up to his shins and weariness in his shoulders. "I brought something," he said. She looked up. "You did." He stepped aside and behind him came a goat. Small white ornery. The boys shouted. Anna clapped. Elise in her corner shrieked with laughter. Mara just stared. "What in God's name are we supposed to do with that?" "Milk her," he said. "She'll give just enough to help Elise." Mara laughed then, full and round, the sound of it new and rare. Clay froze at the sound, then smiled. The goat knocked over the water bucket. That night, after the children were in bed and the fire had burned down to a soft glow, Clay sat with her at the table, both of them nursing cups of coffee gone lukewarm. "You ever think you'd end up here?" he asked. She shook her head. "I thought we'd settle near Dodge. Maybe open a store. Jacob always wanted to live near the bustle. Said he liked hearing other folks' troubles so he didn't have to think so hard about his own." Clay rubbed his jaw. "You want to go still?" She looked around. The worn floors, the cradle tucked in the corner, the boys' muddy boots lined by the door, the goat tied up outside, probably chewing through something important. "No," she said. "I don't." He nodded, quiet. "I want to stay," she said more softly now. "But I don't want to be a burden." Clay's head came up. "You're not. I've got nothing left but my hands and my children." "That's all I needed," he said. Silence settled between them like an old friend. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled something small, worn smooth by time. A ring, plain gold. She set it gently on the table. "I've held on to this too long," she said. "It doesn't mean what it used to." Clay stared at it, then at her. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. I need to lay the past down." Finally, he didn't touch the ring. He touched her hand. "I won't ask you to be mine," he said. "Not unless you want to be. But if you choose to stay, I'll build a room on this cabin. I'll teach your boys to ride. I'll keep the fire lit every night and make sure that goat don't chew through the fence." Her eyes filled and she blinked hard. "You don't have to promise all that." "I know, but I want to." A long moment passed. She slid her hand across the table and laced her fingers with his. Outside, the stars had come out. The wind was soft again. The world no longer felt like a place meant to be endured, but something that might just hold. Mara looked at him, heart open. "I want to be yours," she whispered. He nodded once, steady. "Then you are." The room was built by the end of May. Clay started before sunup most days, hammering frame into earth, while the boys hauled nails and Anna swept sawdust from the doorway. Mara worked beside him when Elise would sleep, leveling boards, measuring cuts, handing him tools without being asked. She had learned how to read the weight in his eyes, the pause in his breath, the tired in his hands. They didn't talk much about what it meant, this building. But each beam raised, each window frame set, was a promise made in pine and sweat. It was the kind of work that told the truth without needing words. He carved her name into the lintel. Just Mara. Small and sure. He didn't ask her first. She didn't need him to. The new room was narrow, just wide enough for a proper bed and a chest against the wall. Clay moved his things there. left the main room for the children who now slept like pups in a den warm and safe, their thinness slowly giving way to the kind of plump that came with full meals and good rest. One night Mara stood in the doorway of the new room holding the lamp low. Clay sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots slow from the long day. "You ever think it'd be like this?" she asked quiet. He looked up. "Like what?" "Peaceful." He shook his head. "Didn't know I was looking for peace. Not till you brought it in with you." She smiled, stepped into the room, and set the lamp down. "I ain't the same woman who showed up half dead on your doorstep." "I know," he said. "That woman had nothing left to lose. This one's got everything to hold on to." She reached for his hand and pulled him up. No words passed between them. None needed. When he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or hurried. It was steady, reverent, the kind of kiss a man gives when he knows exactly what he's been given. Later, as they lay wrapped in one another, the fire still burning low in the main room and the wind rustling the cottonwoods, she traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I don't want to just live here, Clay," she whispered. "I want to build something that lasts." "You already are," he murmured. "Every breath, every step, this place is becoming yours." The next day they took the wagon into town. Not for supplies. Not for errands. Mara wore her best dress, faded blue calico, and held Elise in her arms. Clay had cleaned up too, shaved, wore the coat he hadn't touched all winter. The children rode in back, restless and proud. They walked into the clerk's office together, side by side. Clay nodded to the man behind the counter and filled out the paper without hesitation. Marriage license. Witnessed. Signed. There was no preacher, no rings, no music. Just the clatter of hooves outside and the quiet scratch of pen on paper. But when Clay handed Mara the signed document, folded neat, she held it like something sacred. They didn't tell the children right away. Just rode home slow, the land stretching wide around them, sun warm on their backs. That evening they stood together behind the cabin, looking out over the field where the beans had started to push through. Mara leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "You think we'll be all right?" she asked. "I know we will," he said. "Long as we keep choosing each other." Behind them, laughter echoed from the porch, Anna scolding the boys for chasing the goat into the woodpile. Elise squealed in delight. Mara smiled. In this place that had once been nothing but survival, something else had taken root. Not a second chance. A first. Built not from what they'd lost, but from what they'd decided to become. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the old gold ring, and handed it to Clay. He turned it over in his palm. "Should I?" "No," she said. "Keep it for her. For Elise. Let her know what we came through. And what we built." He nodded, slipped it into his coat. The wind picked up again, warm and carrying the scent of tilled earth. The sky stretched wide and blue above them, and in the quiet between all that had been and all that was still to come, they stood together, no longer surviving, living. If you're still listening, subscribe and keep going.